Hey everybody, it's Chris here with an impromptu figure review. And today I'm reviewing He-Man and Skeletor from the Masters of the Universe Origins line. Yes, you're probably wondering, how do I have these already? Well, Walmart has put up placeholders for several of these figures, and the He-Man and Skeletor for a couple of days, late last week, early this week, were going in and out of stock in very low numbers. I happened to get lucky and get He-Man and Skeletor at the same time, which a lot of people didn't and had to pay shipping twice, but I was able to get them all at once. Walmart shipped them in a box that was big enough, which was nice, but unfortunately they put them in the box the wrong way. So the cards are a little bit bent. They're not too bad because if you put a book on them, I think they'd flatten out, but we're not going to worry about that because I'm going to open these. I just want to kind of go over the packaging real quick. Looks very reminiscent of the vintage He-Man figures that we all know and love. Only difference might be, see on there it says new for 20 and then modern posing retro play. For He-Man it says He-Man, most powerful man in the universe, and Skeletor is the evil lord of destruction. So obviously it says that they include a comic. And I do want to point out I am a little disappointed that those comics are exactly the same for both figures. I was hoping they would be different. I cannot remember if the vintage figures had different comics for each character or if it was different comics for each wave. But anyway, the comics are the same for these two. But I like the little artwork at the top. They have some artwork with each character. Kind of gives a little bit of a blurb about each character on there. Below that, it talks about modernizing and celebrating the original 80s Masters of the Universe action figures. But for me, the real beauty on these cards that you just don't see in figure lines anymore is it shows you other figures in those waves that you can collect. So in this case, it's got He-Man, Teela, Man-at-Arms, Skeletor, Evil-Lyn, and Beast-Man. I really miss not being able to see the figures that are going to come down in that wave or later on. But enough about the cards. Let's move on to these figures here. And we're going to start with He-Man because it's He-Man. The first thing I noticed right off the bat is I went to kind of see if his head was that squishy rubber that the vintage figure is, and it's not. It's actually a kind of a harder molded plastic piece. Obviously, it's got, paint apps on there, but it's not that squishy material. It's a different kind of plastic, and it feels different than the vintage figures. Now, granted, I haven't had a vintage He-Man figure in a long, long time, but it feels like a different kind of plastic than that. And the other thing I kind of noticed was the chest just looks slightly smaller than the original vintage ones. But all in all, they do a wonderful job of capturing the essence of the vintage figures. I have to admit that I haven't collected any of the other He-Man lines that have come since the vintage, but these do it pretty well. I'm sure other lines probably have done a good job, but I'm really happy with these. Of course, the beauty is the articulation that they've worked into these guys. Your standard He-Man figure from the 80s, the head, arms, legs, and waist could move. This guy's got articulation everywhere. The head can do more than the original. Can look up and down, tilt. His arms can do more. He's got joints at the biceps and at the wrist. I do have to point out on both of these figures, one minor nitpick is the wrist joint there, especially on his right wrist and Skeletor as well. Not as strong as I was like. It's not like it's going to come loose. It doesn't hold the pose as well as I would like it. And then at the waist, he's got the traditional where he can turn. In the legs, he can move his legs, but he's got that joint at the knee there, which is hidden really well too. And then he's got a swivel at the boot where his leg meets the boot, and then some action on that ankle there, goes up and down. Yep, there's a little bit of ankle rocker action there too. So he's got a lot of articulation. All in all, it's hidden pretty well. The only one that's kind of obvious is the bicep, but you can get him into so many more poses. So they have the feel of the vintage figures, but you can do so much more with them. He-Man comes with his axe. He comes with the shield. He comes with his power sword. And the accessories are a little bit different. They're not quite done the way the vintage ones were done. The shield doesn't have that red cardboard kind of inserted in there with the outside piece. It's all one piece. It's not as big as I remember the other one being. The power swords do go together. So if you have Skeletor, the two swords will go together. They kind of snap into each other like the other swords did in the vintage line. And you can put them together to create the power sword. Piece I want to talk about is the harness piece that He-Man wears. And it's a kind of a different plastic than I remember the vintage ones being. It's a little bit softer, not quite as brittle, I guess. But anyway, he has that piece on there. He looks really good. So his face, though, he's got that concentrating look or gritting teeth. So it's not kind of the classic He-Man face. I believe the only way to get that at this point in this line was the San Diego Comic-Con pack from last year, which had He-Man and Prince Adam in them. I can't tell you how good it is to have a He-Man figure again, but this thing meets my expectations. It captures what I loved about these figures growing up, and it brings it into a modern era. And so I'm glad that if I'm not going to collect vintage He-Man, that I chose the Origins line as my starting point. And Skeletor, same thing with the head. He's kind of got a open mouth look, like he's either laughing or he's yelling at one of his minions. He's got his staff, and then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, he's got his sword. And again, the same thing with his kind of harness that goes on there. You know, it's a little bit softer plastic. The shoulder pauldrons don't get in the way, and, you know, you can kind of force them up a little bit when you're moving them around. But he's got all the same articulation as He-Man. Really well done. Again, all pretty well hidden. The only one that you really kind of see is the where the biceps meet there. I think that this is a great way to start the line. I hope that people can find He-Man and Skeletor easily. What's interesting about these figures is, as a kid, I had most of the villains while my brother had most of the heroes. So I did have a couple of heroes, but I always found the villains in the He-Man line to be really cool. They were just different colors and they had different themes. What was interesting for me as a kid, though, is I never put two and two together that they were using the same mold over and over for those figures, but I just ate it up. I'm really happy to have these figures in my collection. I think this is a great starting point. I think the line's off to a good start. I'm really looking forward to getting some other figures in to kind of fill out the ranks and put them on my shelf. I'm hoping, you know, we've got the Sky Sled coming. We've got Battle Cat that they showed at Toy Fair. So we know that smaller vehicles are in the works. I'm not sure I want to get into too many big vehicles, but it would be interesting to see if they eventually do a Gray Skull or a Snake Mountain. I hope you enjoyed this review. And until next time, I wish you good luck on your toy hunt.